Majesco and WayForward continue the recent trend of 2D revivals on the Wii with A Boy and His Blob, a reimagining of the classic 1989 NES title. It manages to put some new twists on the original formula, and it enjoys an adorable art style to boot. But is this adventure truly out of this world? There isn't much of a story to speak of in A Boy and His Blob. The focus is on immersing you in the game world via the atmospherics and stunning sights and sounds. There's a brief sequence that introduces the boy to his blob companion, but apart from that, everything is left to your imagination. It's an approach that's worked well for games like Metroid, and A Boy and His Blob is no exception. A Boy and His Blob is a traditional side-scrolling platformer peppered with lots of puzzles. Unlike the original title's interconnected world, players complete individual levels in each area in order to progress through the game. While this makes things incredibly linear, it doesn't come at the cost of exploration. In fact, many levels will encourage you to scour every nook and cranny, and you'll also have the option to replay completed levels over again. This is largely a byproduct of the great puzzles built into each one. Levels are broken down into a series of puzzles and platforming segments. Your goal is to simply traverse each level and reach the end without dying, though there's a secondary objective that involves collecting 3 hidden chests along the way. While there are a few visual clues as to what to do, you're more or less on your own as you think through some truly clever puzzles. It's got an old-school feel about it, and solving some of the more difficult scenarios truly feels satisfying. Those looking for a more action-oriented experience won't find much reprieve, as the game features virtually no combat. There's a boss encounter at the end of each world, but even these segments play out more like well-crafted puzzles than an actual battle. Despite the lack of combat, there's no shortage of heart-pounding moments during the later stages, where the challenge really ramps up. Collecting all 3 chests will unlock challenge levels, which require quick thinking and even quicker reflexes. With over 80 levels that will take you around 10 hours to complete, A Boy and His Blob easily has more than enough to keep you entertained. A Boy and His Blob sticks to traditional controls, utilizing the Wii Remote nunchuck combo and the classic controller. Oddly enough, the GameCube controller is not an option. More perplexing though, and easily our biggest complaint, is the lack of D-pad control. Being forced to use the analog stick is counterintuitive and feels lethargic, and makes certain sections much more difficult. Instead, you use the D-pad for the all-important command of hugging or scolding your gooey companion. Simply running and jumping won't get you very far, but this is where your ample collection of jelly beans comes in. You have a whole bunch of them at your disposal, which you use to transform your blob companion into various objects. Things range from a simple ladder to more complex things like a bouncy ball or a trampoline. Each of these forms is easy to get the hang of, and their varied effects do a good job of changing up the game's pace. You have full control of the trajectory of your jelly beans, allowing you a degree of precision that will come in handy for some of the more advanced puzzles. You'll sometimes stumble when toggling between beans, owing to the imprecise analog controls, but it's never a big deal. The same goes for calling your blob back to you. It can get stuck sometimes, but it'll always reach you after a few tries. Though the lack of D-pad controls are a bummer, A Boy and His Blob plays great as a whole. It's hard to fault it much on its small kinks when the overall experience is so well crafted. Though 2D games are by no means rare on the Wii, A Boy and His Blob manages to stand out. Its visual style is reminiscent of a Saturday morning cartoon, and it's easy to get sucked into its cohesive, HUD-less world. There are some definite high points, like the nighttime stages that showcase some great lighting effects. As for the low points, you'll encounter a couple of stages where it's rather difficult to differentiate between the foreground and background imagery. The soundtrack is also very subtle, relying on ambient noises with soothing tunes in moments of downtime, but quickly picking up during the more intense segments. However, the sound bites for calling out to your blob can get pretty annoying, approaching the maddening feelings induced by your fairy companion in Zelda titles.
Blob! Blob!
A Boy and His Blob is a slow burn that requires patience, so those looking for a bit more action should stay mindful of this. However, if you're hankering for a great 2D platformer with clever, inventive puzzles, then you'll find plenty to love here.